Long before clocks learned how to tick, before calendars learned how to remember days, before words learned how to hurry, the morning arrived quietly. It did not announce itself. It did not ring or buzz or shout. It simply became light. A thin gray light slid slowly across stone, crept through leaves, and rested on the closed eyelids of the people who slept beneath a shallow rock shelter. They did not wake all at once. No one ever did. One person shifted, another sighed. Someone turned their face away from the cooling embers of a fire that had burned down during the night. The fire had done its job. It had kept away animals, kept away cold, and now it was only warmth, fading but still alive in spirit. This was how most days began for the people we later called cavemen, though they never called themselves anything at all. They had no word for day in the way we understand it. There was only light time and dark time, waking time and resting time, hunger time and full time. Everything else simply happened in between. Someone sat up slowly, joints stiff from the ground. A hand brushed ash aside, checking if any heat remained. There usually was, there almost always was. Fire was never truly allowed to die if it could be helped. Starting it again took patience, and patience was something they preferred to save for other things, like waiting for animals or waiting for fruit to ripen or waiting for children to stop crying. Another person stood and stretched, arms lifting toward the rock ceiling above, fingers brushing stone smoothed by centuries of wind. Muscles remembered yesterday's walking, yesterday's lifting, yesterday's carrying. They did not complain. Muscles did not complain then. They simply existed, ready to be used again. Children woke next, though children is a word that suggests something smaller and gentler than what they truly were. These were young humans, already strong, already observant, already learning everything without being told. They watched everything: how stones were chosen, how bones were cleaned, how hands moved when cutting meat or scraping hides. They watched the way faces changed when the weather shifted, the way voices softened when danger passed, the way silence grew heavy when something went wrong. One child crawled toward the edge of the shelter and peered out, blinking at the brightening land. The world looked the same as yesterday. It usually did. A line of trees stood patiently where they always stood. The ground stretched outward, uneven and familiar. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called, not urgently, just because it always did at that time. Someone else emerged from sleep and began the slow task of morning chewing. There was no breakfast as we know it, no meals divided by hours. Food was eaten when it was available, when it was needed, when it would not spoil. A handful of dried roots, a piece of meat saved from the night before, a cluster of berries collected yesterday afternoon. Eating was quiet. No one rushed. No one talked much. Talking required energy, and energy was precious, even on easy days. After eating, people simply sat. They looked at the land. They listened. This was not laziness. This was preparation. The land always spoke first if you waited long enough. The direction of the wind mattered. The sounds mattered. A missing sound mattered most of all. Someone rose and picked up a stone tool left near the fire. They turned it in their hand, inspecting the edge. It was still sharp enough. It would cut hide cleanly. It would scrape bone well. It would not need fixing yet. The person set it down again, satisfied, and rubbed their hands together, feeling the dry warmth of the morning. Others began to move slowly away from the shelter, not far, just enough to relieve themselves, just enough to stretch legs and backs. There was no shame. There was no privacy. Bodies were simply bodies, doing what bodies did. Everything was practical. Everything was ordinary. Soon, the day's quiet rhythm began to form. Some people drifted toward the trees, baskets slung over shoulders, ready to gather whatever the land offered without complaint. They knew where to look. They knew which plants were safe, which were bitter, which would make the stomach hurt if eaten too much. This knowledge was not written, it was lived. It lived in hands and tongues, and memories passed silently from one generation to the next. Others stayed near the shelter, tending to tasks that did not require distance. Someone added dry grass to the fire, coaxing it back to life. Someone began scraping a hide stretched between wooden pegs, the sound steady and repetitive, a sound that would continue for hours, soothing in its sameness. Someone else knelt over a pile of stones, testing each one with careful taps, listening for the right sound, the sound that meant strength, the sound that meant usefulness. Farther out, the hunters moved slowly, not because they were tired, but because rushing frightened animals and wasted energy. They followed paths invisible to anyone else. Bent grass, broken twigs, The faintest impression of a hoof or paw in soft soil. They communicated with glances and gestures, words unnecessary. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew when to wait. But hunting was not what filled most of the day. Hunting happened when it needed to. Most days were made of smaller things. Walking, watching, waiting, fixing. Teaching without teaching, living without naming it. The sun climbed higher and shadows shifted across the ground. The people adjusted with it, moving into shade when heat grew strong, stepping into light when warmth was needed. Someone found a cluster of roots and sat down right there, digging them up with a sharpened stick. Someone else discovered a fallen log filled with insects and smiled quietly, knowing this would be food too. Children played nearby, though play was not separate from learning. They threw stones not aimlessly, but at marks chosen carefully. They followed insects, observing how they moved, how they disappeared. They copied the adults, mimicking gestures, pretending to scrape hides or carry loads far heavier than they could manage. Laughter happened, but it was soft and brief, quickly dissolving back into quiet. When the hunters returned, if they returned with meat, there was no celebration. There was gratitude, yes, but quiet gratitude. Meat meant work. Cutting, carrying, sharing, cooking, preserving. No one ate immediately. Everything had a process. Everything had to last. If the hunters returned empty-handed, no one blamed them. The land decided. The land always decided. As the afternoon stretched on, the pace slowed even further. Heat made movement unnecessary. People rested. They leaned against stones. They lay back and stared at the sky, watching clouds drift without wondering where they were going. No one measured time. No one counted hours. The body knew when to move again. Someone repaired a tool, chipping carefully, flake by flake, the rhythm hypnotic. Someone braided plant fibers into cord, fingers moving from memory alone. Someone hummed, a low sound, almost part of the wind. Stories were not always told with words. Sometimes they were told with sounds, with gestures, with repeated actions that carried meaning deeper than language. As the sun began its slow descent, energy returned, gentle but steady. People gathered again, not because they had planned to, but because they always did. Food was shared. Meat was cooked over fire, the smell drifting into the cooling air. Fat dripped onto embers, hissing softly. Faces glowed orange and gold in the firelight. Eating in the evening was slower, fuller. Bellies warmed. Muscles relaxed. Someone leaned against someone else. Children grew heavy with sleep, heads resting against knees, eyes half closed. The day had been long, but not exhausting. It had been full, but not overwhelming. Stories emerged now, if they emerged at all, not dramatic tales of heroes, but quiet recollections. A place where water had once flowed, an animal seen long ago. A storm remembered. These stories did not entertain, they reminded. They stitched memory to survival. As darkness deepened, the fire became the center of everything. Shadows danced on stone. Insects buzzed briefly, then faded. The world grew smaller, reduced to warmth and closeness and breath. One by one, people settled into sleep. Not all at once. Someone always stayed half awake, listening. The land never slept fully, and neither did its people. But fear did not rule them. Familiarity did. The fire crackled softly. The stars appeared indifferent and constant. Another day ended without being named. Another day lived without being counted. And this, more than hunting, more than caves, more than tools, was what cavemen actually did all day. They lived slowly. They listened. They endured. They rested when rest was possible. They worked when work was necessary. They existed within the world, not above it, not against it, but inside it, breathing with it, aging with it, sleeping beneath it. And as sleep deepened beneath the ancient sky, the land continued, just as it always had, waiting patiently for the next quiet morning to arrive without announcement. The fire did not go out all at once. It never did. It softened first, the bright tongues of flame shrinking into glowing lines, then into quiet red eyes watching the night. Around it, bodies lay close together, not out of affection as we define it, but for warmth, for safety, for the simple logic of shared heat. Breath rose and fell in uneven rhythms, some deep and slow, others light and restless. Dreams came without ceremony. No one wondered what they meant. Above them, the night moved carefully. Clouds slid across the stars. An animal passed somewhere beyond the edge of firelight, its presence known only by a brief pause and the sound of insects. No one stirred. The night was familiar. It had been survived many times before. When sleep loosened its grip, it did so gently. A shoulder twitched. Fingers curled. Someone turned toward the cooling fire without waking fully. Time passed, but no one counted it. Eventually, light returned, thin and gray again, as it always did, easing itself across stone and skin. The first person to wake did not open their eyes right away. They listened. The fire was still alive. Good. The air was cool but not biting. Good. No sudden sounds. Good. Only then did eyes open, blinking slowly, adjusting to the quiet brightness of another day that had not asked to be noticed. They sat up and fed the fire, careful not to wake the others too quickly. Dry grass, a few twigs. The embers responded obediently. Flame returned, modest, but willing. Fire was never dramatic in the morning. It was cooperative. Others woke in their own time. A child rolled over and buried their face against a warm arm. Someone stretched and cracked joints that had already grown used to the ground. Hunger arrived, not urgently, just as a gentle reminder. Food would come. It always did, one way or another. The morning passed much like the one before it and the one before that, and the countless mornings that would follow. But sameness did not mean boredom. There was always difference in detail. A cloud shaped differently. A plant growing where it had not been before. A small injury that needed attention. A tool that finally broke after long use. Someone noticed a crack in a stone blade and set it aside, knowing it would need to be replaced soon. Someone else gathered children and led them toward a shallow stream, teaching without speaking, showing them how water moved around stones, how it revealed smooth surfaces beneath. They learned where to step, where not to. Slipping was not dangerous here, but learning was constant. The land offered small gifts throughout the day. A bird's abandoned egg. A fallen branch just the right shape for a digging stick. Clay near the water, cool and soft, pressed absent-mindedly between fingers. No one hoarded these things. Possession was temporary. Everything eventually returned to the land. When the sun climbed higher, movement slowed again. People rested in patches of shade, chewing quietly, watching insects work tirelessly at their own mysterious tasks. Someone scratched a pattern into the dirt with a stick, not to record anything, not to make art, but simply because the motion felt right. The lines meant nothing and everything. Occasionally, someone wandered farther than usual, curiosity guiding them rather than need. They returned later with news shared in gestures and expressions. A new herd moving east. A tree heavy with fruit not yet ready. A place where the ground felt unstable. Information passed through the group without urgency, stored away for later use. Afternoon brought repair work. Nets mended. Baskets reinforced. Hides turned and checked. These tasks were slow, repetitive, and deeply satisfying. Hands moved from memory. Minds drifted. The rhythm itself was enough. Children drifted between adults, sometimes helping, sometimes simply watching. They learned patience here. Tasks were not rushed to be finished. They were done when they were done. As the heat softened and shadows lengthened, preparation for the evening began without any spoken agreement. Someone gathered fuel. Someone checked stored food. Someone fetched water. The day folded inward, drawing everyone back toward the fire. Hunting happened again, or it didn't. Gathering succeeded, or it didn't. Either way, the evening came. It always did. Food was prepared carefully, shared evenly. No one ate alone. No one ate more than their share. Fullness was not a goal. Sustenance was. The fire brightened against the darkening sky. Faces appeared and disappeared in flickering light. Someone told a story again, a familiar one, retold not for novelty but for comfort. Children listened until sleep claimed them mid-sentence, heads dropping softly. Night settled in layers, cool air, deep silence. Occasional sound. The world outside the firelight remained vast and unknown, but not frightening. It was simply there, as it always had been. Sleep returned slowly, wrapping each person in its own gentle way. Another day dissolved without leaving a mark. No one marked time passing. They lived within it. And this pattern continued, day after day, season after season, not because it was chosen, but because it worked. Because it kept them alive. Because it allowed them to rest. This was the quiet truth of caveman life, not constant danger. Not endless struggle. But a steady balance of effort and stillness, attention and ease, work and waiting, A life shaped by the land, paced by the sun, soft by repetition. And as the fire dimmed once more and the stars watched silently above, sleep deepened again, untroubled, slow, and complete. The stars shifted almost imperceptibly, tracing paths no one followed with their eyes. Below them, the small cluster of sleeping bodies breathed in uneven harmony, the sound gentle enough to blend with the wind moving through grass. Night was never empty. It was full of subtle motion, full of things that did not demand attention. At some point, someone stirred, not awake, not asleep, simply turning toward warmth. A child whimpered briefly, then settled again when a familiar hand rested against their back. The fire sighed, a soft collapse of embers falling inward. Nothing else changed. Morning arrived again without ceremony. Light crept in the same patient way, touching stone first, then skin. Someone opened their eyes and stared at the ceiling of rock, tracing cracks they had seen 1,000 times before. Each line was familiar. Each line had always been there. They rose slowly, careful not to disturb the sleepers nearest them, and stepped outside the shelter. Cool air wrapped around their legs. The world smelled faintly of earth and old smoke. Dew clung to grass. In the distance, something moved, but it was far away and unconcerned. The fire needed attention. It always did. Twigs were added. Breath was blown gently. Flame returned, small and obedient. Someone else emerged, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and sat nearby without speaking. They shared the warmth in silence. As the group woke fully, the day assembled itself from familiar pieces. Hunger surfaced quietly. Tools were checked. Children were counted without counting, simply by noticing who was present and who was not. Everyone was where they should be. A decision formed, not spoken but understood. Some would go farther today. The land beyond the ridge had not been visited in a while. It might offer something new. Others would remain, tending to what needed tending. No one argued. No one questioned. This was not leadership as we imagine it. It was alignment. Those leaving prepared slowly. They gathered tools, adjusted simple coverings, touched the heads of children they would leave behind. The farewell was brief. They would return. Or they would not. Both possibilities existed without drama. The walkers moved off at a steady pace, neither hurried nor slow. Their feet knew the ground. Their eyes scanned constantly, not searching, simply noticing. The land unfolded in front of them, familiar but never identical. A fallen tree redirected their path. A sudden breeze carried a scent that made them pause and listen. Back at the shelter, the day settled into its quieter version. Someone worked on shaping a new stone, tapping patiently, listening for the right sound. Someone scraped another hide, the steady rhythm marking time better than any measure. Children followed insects again, fascinated by the way they vanished into cracks and reappeared somewhere else. The sun rose higher, then hovered. Heat pressed gently, not oppressive, just present. People rested. They leaned against stone. They lay flat on their backs and watched the sky, watching clouds slowly change their minds about where to go. One person noticed a child struggling to tie fibers together and silently demonstrated, hands moving slowly, deliberately. The child watched closely, tried again, failed again, then succeeded. No praise was given. None was needed. Time passed in this way, unmarked but full. The fire was kept low during the heat, just enough to live. Food was eaten when hunger returned, small amounts, unceremonious. Water was fetched, shared, returned. In the distance, the walkers moved through the land, stopping occasionally to inspect tracks or test the wind. They did not find much today. A few edible plants. Signs of animals that had already passed through. Nothing urgent. Nothing dramatic. When they returned, late in the afternoon, their arrival caused only a slight shift in attention. They set down what they carried. Information passed through glances and gestures. Tomorrow might be different, or it might not. As evening approached, energy gathered again. Fuel was collected. Food was prepared. The fire grew brighter, pushing back the cooling air. Shadows lengthened and danced across stone. People ate together, chewing slowly, feeling the day settle into their bodies. Muscles relaxed. Breathing deepened. Someone hummed again, the same low sound as before, unchanged by time. Stories emerged, not new ones but familiar shapes. A memory of a place now far away. A cautionary tale about a hidden drop near the river. These were not told to entertain, but to remember. Children grew heavy with sleep once more. They leaned into warmth, eyes closing without resistance. Adults followed soon after, one by one, arranging themselves instinctively, bodies fitting together like stones in a wall. The fire softened. The night took over. The land breathed. And so it went, not just for days, but for seasons. When the air grew colder, coverings thickened. When food grew scarce, movement increased. When abundance returned, rest followed. The rhythm adjusted, but never broke. This was what filled their lives, not constant struggle, but constant attention. Not endless fear, but practiced awareness. Not boredom, but deep familiarity. They did not wonder about the future. They did not regret the past. They lived in the wide, quiet space of now, shaped by sun and soil and shared breath. And as sleep wrapped around them once more, the ancient world continued, patient and unhurried, holding them exactly where they were meant to be. The night deepened, then thinned again, as it always did. Darkness never stayed forever, and light never hurried. Somewhere far away, rain fell without being seen, soaking ground that would remember it later. Near the shelter, everything remained dry and still. A faint breeze brushed across faces, carrying the smell of damp earth and old leaves. Someone shifted in their sleep, dreaming without images, only sensations, warmth, pressure, the quiet reassurance of others nearby. When morning came again, it brought no surprise. It arrived the same way it always had, a slow unveiling rather than an entrance. Pale light touched the fire pit, revealing gray ash and patient embers waiting to be stirred. Someone woke and reached for a stick, nudging the coals, coaxing life back into them. Fire responded, as it always did. The group woke gradually, stretching stiff limbs, rubbing eyes, breathing deeply. There was no rush to stand, no reason to hurry. The land was not going anywhere. Today felt cooler. Someone noticed it immediately, pulling a hide closer around their shoulders. Another person nodded, understanding without explanation. Cooler air meant certain animals might move differently. Plants might behave differently. Everything adjusted. After eating a small portion of stored food, people spread out again, not far, just enough to let the day breathe. Someone followed a familiar path toward a stand of trees, checking for fallen branches useful for tools or fuel. Someone else went to the water, kneeling quietly, watching ripples form and disappear. Children explored the edge of the clearing, picking up stones and dropping them again, learning weight and texture through touch alone. They did not need instructions. The world taught them constantly. The hours passed softly. Someone spent a long time shaping a single piece of stone, stopping often, examining it from different angles. This was not inefficiency, it was care. A poorly shaped tool wasted effort later. Time spent now saved time later. Another person sorted through dried plants, separating what was still good from what had grown bitter. The bitter ones were set aside. They would not be wasted. Bitter plants still had uses. Everything did. As the sun moved across the sky, the group shifted with it, seeking shade, then light, responding instinctively. No one argued with the weather. It simply was. A sudden sound made heads turn briefly. A bird taking flight. Nothing more. Attention returned to tasks just as quickly. Alarm was saved for true danger. Midday passed almost unnoticed. Hunger came and went. Water was shared. Rest happened naturally, bodies lowering themselves to the ground without permission or guilt. Someone lay on their back, staring at the sky, watching clouds thin and thicken. Their mind wandered without direction. Thoughts did not need to lead anywhere. They could simply exist, then fade. In the afternoon, a child stumbled and scraped their knee. The reaction was calm. An adult examined it, cleaned it with water, pressed a soft plant against it. The child sniffed, then stopped crying. Pain was acknowledged, not dramatized. The day continued its quiet unfolding. A new hide was finished and set aside. A basket was reinforced. A tool was tested and approved. Small successes, uncelebrated but satisfying. Toward evening, the air cooled further. Someone noticed animal movement in the distance and pointed it out. Others looked, memorizing the direction, the pace. Information stored, not acted on yet. The fire was built up again, its light growing warmer as the sky dimmed. Food was prepared carefully. Portions were shared evenly. No one took more than they needed. Fullness was comfortable, not heavy. As darkness settled, the group drew closer, forming a loose circle around the fire. Faces glowed softly. Eyes reflected flame. The night pressed in, but did not threaten. Someone made a low sound, rhythmic and familiar. Others listened, breathing in time with it. The sound did not tell a story, it created a space. A space where everyone could simply be. Children drifted into sleep once more, heads lolling, bodies slack. Adults followed slowly, easing themselves onto the ground, arranging hides, finding familiar positions. The fire softened again, retreating inward. The stars returned, steady and indifferent. Another day dissolved quietly into memory. This was the truth of their lives. Days layered upon days, so similar they blurred together, yet each one complete. They did not need excitement, they did not need explanation. They lived, and that was enough. And as sleep deepened once more beneath the ancient sky, the world continued its slow turning, holding them gently, just as it always had. The stars held their places while the ground cooled beneath sleeping bodies. Somewhere nearby, an animal moved carefully, pausing often, aware of firelight even when it was only a faint glow. It passed without incident, leaving behind nothing but a brief disturbance in the air. Hours passed in layers of shallow and deep sleep. Someone dreamed of walking, though they did not remember where. Someone else dreamed of warmth, though they were already warm. Dreams were not questioned. They were simply another way the mind rested. Eventually the light returned again, pale and quiet. Morning slipped across the land like a familiar visitor who did not need to knock. The fire waited. The people stirred. One person woke before the others and sat still for a long moment, listening. The wind had shifted. The air smelled slightly different. They noted this without naming it, storing the feeling away. Then they leaned forward and brought the fire back to life, coaxing flame from the remains of yesterday. Others followed, waking one by one. A child yawned and stretched, copying an adult without knowing why. Someone rubbed their hands together and held them close to the fire, eyes half closed, enjoying the warmth without thinking about it. Food was simple again. A few dried roots. A small piece of meat. Nothing elaborate. Eating was quiet. Chewing was slow. No one heard the morning. As the group fully woke, the day shaped itself naturally. Someone noticed that the sky looked heavy, clouds gathering slowly. Rain might come later, or it might not. Both possibilities were accepted equally. People adjusted plans without discussing them. Tasks closer to shelter took priority. Tools were checked again. Coverings were shaken out and mended where needed. Children were kept nearby, not because danger was expected, but because rain made the ground slippery. The land felt different today, softer, quieter, sounds carried less far. Even the birds seemed subdued. People responded by moving more slowly, conserving energy. Mid-morning passed in steady work. Someone scraped another hide, stopping often to feel the texture, to test its softness. Someone braided cord again, fingers moving in familiar patterns. Someone sat near the shelter entrance, sharpening a tool, the soft tap of stone against stone marking time better than any sun. A child asked a question without words, holding up a stone and tilting their head. An adult examined it, nodded, and showed how to strike it properly. The lesson was brief. The child tried, failed, tried again. Rain came gently, as if unsure of itself. A light drizzle, barely enough to darken the ground. People moved closer to shelter but did not rush. The fire was shielded, kept alive with practiced ease. The smell of damp earth spread through the air. The rain passed as quietly as it had arrived. The land drank it in, leaves shook themselves free of droplets. Life resumed its steady pace without comment. The afternoon felt heavy with humidity. People rested more, work slowed. No one forced themselves to continue when rest was needed. Survival depended on knowing when to stop as much as knowing when to act. Someone lay on their side, watching a child draw lines in the dirt with a stick, erasing them and drawing them again. The patterns meant nothing, but the act itself was soothing. Repetition had its own comfort. As the sun dipped lower, energy returned slightly. People moved again, gathering fuel made damp by rain, choosing pieces that would burn anyway. The fire grew stronger, pushing back the cool evening air. Food was prepared once more, shared once more, eaten slowly. The taste was familiar, comforting in its sameness. Night arrived softly, without wind. Clouds thinned, revealing stars again. The world felt freshly washed, quiet and open. People gathered close to the fire. Someone leaned against someone else. A child fell asleep mid-breath, carried gently to a spot near warmth. No stories were told tonight. None were needed. Silence filled the space instead, thick but peaceful. The fire crackled softly, the only sound worth listening to. Sleep returned, wrapping around each person without effort. Another day ended without being marked. Another night began without announcement. And so life continued, not in great events, but in small, steady moments. In the way fire was tended, in the way food was shared, in the way rest was honored. This was what filled their days. Not mystery, not drama, but presence, quiet, enduring presence. And beneath the stars, beneath the passing clouds, beneath the turning sky, they slept again, held gently by the ancient world that had always been their home. The fire settled into a low, steady glow, its warmth spreading outward in a wide, comforting circle. Ash shifted softly as embers found new places to rest. Around it, bodies lay still, the rise and fall of breath blending with the quiet sounds of the night. Somewhere, water moved over stones, endlessly patient. Sleep loosened and tightened in waves. Someone turned over, pulling a hide closer around their shoulders. Another exhaled deeply, sinking further into rest. The night passed without interruption, without demand. When morning returned, it felt cooler again, the air carrying a faint sharpness that hinted at a change of season. Light crept across the shelter floor, tracing familiar shapes. Someone woke and noticed the chill immediately, rubbing their arms before tending to the fire. Flame responded as it always did, small at first, then steady. Others followed into wakefulness. The group stirred slowly, easing themselves upright, stretching stiff muscles that would soon remember their purpose. A child blinked sleepily and leaned against an adult, not ready to separate from warmth just yet. Food was shared in quiet bites. No one spoke. The day did not require words to begin. Today felt like a day for staying close. The land beyond the shelter looked different in the cooler light, shadows lingering longer, dew clinging stubbornly to grass. People sensed it instinctively. Movement remained near. Tasks focused inward. Someone worked on strengthening the shelter, adjusting stones, reinforcing places where wind slipped through. Someone else sorted through stored items, checking what would last and what needed to be used soon. Nothing was wasted. Planning was constant, even when it felt like rest. Children stayed close, mimicking movements, occasionally helping, occasionally simply watching. They learned not through explanation, but through repetition, through being surrounded by doing. As the sun climbed, it brought little warmth, just enough to take the edge off the chill. People sat together, backs against stone, soaking it in. Conversation did not rise. Silence was comfortable. A tool finally broke, a clean snap after long service. The person holding it examined the break calmly, then set it aside. It had done its job, another would take its place. Everything ended eventually. Midday passed quietly. Hunger came and was answered. Thirst came and was answered. Rest came and was accepted. No one pushed against the rhythm. A child laughed suddenly, briefly, at nothing in particular. The sound startled birds nearby, who lifted and settled again. The laughter faded as quickly as it had appeared, absorbed back into the afternoon. Clouds drifted overhead, thin and slow. The lights softened. Someone lay back and closed their eyes, feeling the ground beneath them, solid and familiar. As evening approached, activity picked up slightly. Fuel was gathered, fire prepared, food readied. These actions were so ingrained they required almost no thought. When the fire burned brighter, faces glowed once more. The air smelled of smoke and cooked food. Bellies warmed, shoulders relaxed. Someone shared a quiet observation, pointing out how the moon would rise later tonight, nearly full. Others nodded. They would notice it when it happened. There was no need to watch for it. Children grew drowsy early, the cool air heavy on their eyelids. They were guided gently to places near warmth. Adults followed not long after, easing into familiar sleeping positions. The fire softened again, never fully dying. Night wrapped around the shelter, close and steady. Stars appeared one by one, patient and unchanging. Another day faded without fanfare. Another cycle completed without being counted. This was the fullness of their lives. Not measured in years or achievements, but in continuity, in mornings that arrived gently, in days that unfolded without force, in nights that welcomed rest. And as sleep deepened once more, the ancient world continued its slow turning, holding them quietly, as it always had and as it always would. The night remained calm, stretched wide and unbroken. A faint breeze passed through the shelter, lifting the edge of a hide, then letting it fall back into place. The fire answered with a soft crackle, adjusting itself without help. Everything knew what to do. Deep in sleep, bodies grew heavy, sinking fully into the ground beneath them. Muscles released their effort. Minds let go of the day. Nothing was expected of anyone now. When the moon rose, it did so quietly, pale light slipping across stone and skin. It revealed familiar outlines, then moved on, uninterested in staying. No one noticed. Sleep held them firmly. Hours later, the cold crept in just enough to stir someone. They shifted closer to warmth, pulling another hide over their legs. The movement was slow and half-conscious, practiced from countless nights before. Comfort returned, and sleep followed again. Morning came, as it always did, unannounced. The light was different today, brighter, clearer. The air felt still. Someone opened their eyes and watched dust drift lazily in the shelter's entrance. They lay still for a while, simply breathing. Eventually, they rose and tended the fire. Flame returned with familiar obedience. Others woke soon after, drawn by warmth and habit rather than sound. A child sat up and rubbed their face, hair sticking up in odd directions, then smiled faintly for no reason at all. The group gathered themselves slowly. There was no urgency in standing, no need to rush the day into being. Food was eaten in small amounts. Water was shared. The morning stretched comfortably. Today felt open. Clear sky. Calm air. The land seemed inviting. People sensed it and adjusted, preparing to move farther out again. Tools were checked. Coverings secured. Children were told, gently, to stay close to those remaining behind. The walkers set out with steady steps, feet finding familiar ground. The land greeted them without comment. Birds lifted briefly, then settled. Insects continued their work, indifferent to passing humans. Those who stayed behind settled into their own rhythm. Someone worked on shaping a new tool from a carefully chosen stone, tapping patiently, stopping often to feel the edge. Someone else repaired a basket, weaving fibers together with slow precision. Children played nearby, stacking stones, knocking them over, stacking them again. Time passed unnoticed. The sun climbed, then hovered. Heat returned gently. People rested when they needed to, lying in the shade, watching the sky through half-closed eyes. Farther out, the walkers found signs of animals moving through the area. Nothing immediate, nothing urgent. They memorized the details and continued on, unbothered. By afternoon, everyone's energy softened. Movement slowed. Tasks became smaller. The day eased toward evening without resistance. When the walkers returned, they brought little more than information. It was enough. Knowledge was as valuable as food. It shaped tomorrow. The fire was built up again as the air cooled. Food was prepared, shared, eaten slowly. Faces glowed in the familiar light. A child asked a question without words, and an adult answered with a gesture. Understanding passed easily. Darkness arrived, wrapping the land in quiet. Stars emerged, one by one. The moon followed later, just as promised. People settled into sleep again, bodies fitting into practiced places. The fire softened. Breath slowed. Another day slipped into the past without leaving a mark. Another night began its gentle watch. This was the long, unbroken thread of their lives. Days flowing into days, nights folding into nights. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. And beneath the vast, patient sky, surrounded by land that knew them well, they slept again, carried forward by the steady, ancient rhythm that had always guided them. The night held steady, untroubled and wide. A distant sound echoed briefly across the land, then faded, leaving the quiet intact. Near the shelter, nothing demanded attention. The fire breathed slowly, its warmth sinking into the ground and the bodies resting around it. Sleep moved through the group in deep, even waves. Someone dreamed of walking beside water, though no water appeared. Someone else dreamed only of warmth and weight, the comfort of stillness. Dreams did not linger when morning came. They slipped away unnoticed. Light returned again, gentle and pale. It brushed the edge of the shelter, then crept inward, touching familiar faces. Someone woke and remained still for a while, listening to the soft chorus of breathing around them. Everything sounded as it should. They rose and tended the fire with practiced ease. A few careful movements, a few pieces of fuel, and flame responded. Warmth spread again. Others stirred, drawn to it without thinking. The morning felt ordinary, and that was its comfort. Food was shared quietly, No one spoke. The land outside waited patiently. Today brought no strong feelings of movement or stillness. The group responded by doing a little of everything. Some wandered short distances, gathering what the land offered. Others stayed near, repairing and preparing. Children drifted between tasks, sometimes helping, sometimes simply observing. A child found a smooth stone near the water and carried it back proudly. An adult examined it, smiled faintly, and handed it back. The stone was kept not because it was useful, but because it pleased the hand. That was reason enough. Midday warmth settled in. People rested. Someone leaned against the stone and closed their eyes, listening to the soft sounds of life continuing nearby. Insects buzzed. Leaves shifted. The world breathed. Work resumed slowly. A new tool began to take shape. A hide was turned and checked. Cord was tested and tightened. These small acts filled the hours gently. As the afternoon waned, clouds gathered again, thin and high. Light softened. The air grew calm. Someone pointed out the change, more out of habit than concern. Rain might come later, or it might not. Evening preparation began naturally. Fuel gathered, fire strengthened, food prepared. The familiar pattern returned, comforting in its predictability. As darkness fell, people gathered close once more. The fire's glow reflected in calm eyes. Food warmed bellies, shoulders relaxed. A story began quietly, half remembered, its details shifting with each telling. No one corrected it. Accuracy mattered less than familiarity. The sound of the voice mattered more than the words. Children drifted into sleep, one by one, bodies heavy with the day. Adults followed slowly, easing themselves into rest. The fire softened again. Night settled around the shelter, cool and steady. Stars appeared above, patient and distant. Another day passed without being counted. Another night began its watch. This was the shape of their lives, repeated endlessly, not because they lacked imagination, but because this rhythm sustained them. It allowed them to wake, to work, to sleep, without struggle. And as sleep deepened once more beneath the ancient sky, the world continued its slow turning, holding them quietly, gently, exactly where they belonged. The night settled even deeper, thick with stillness, as if the world itself had decided to pause. The fire rested in a shallow bed of ash, glowing faintly, its warmth lingering just enough to be felt through hides and stone. Breath moved quietly in the darkness, steady and uncounted. A cloud passed over the moon, softening the light. Shadows shifted without drawing attention. Somewhere far off, water continued its endless journey over rock, patient and unconcerned with who slept nearby. Sleep came in long, gentle stretches. No one dreamed loudly. No one stirred often. The day had been full enough to invite rest without resistance. When morning returned, it arrived wrapped in cool air and pale light. The shelter brightened slowly, revealing familiar shapes once again. Someone woke and lay still for a time, feeling the ground beneath them, feeling the calm of another beginning. They rose and tended the fire, as had been done countless times before. A few movements, a breath, flame returned, warmth followed. Others woke in their own time. A child sat up, eyes half closed, leaning instinctively toward heat. An adult placed a steady hand on their shoulder, grounding them without words. Food was shared simply. No one lingered over it. Eating was part of waking, not an event. Outside, the land waited, open and unchanged. The day felt quiet again. Not empty, just calm. People moved slowly, choosing tasks that matched the mood of the air. Someone repaired a small tear in a hide. Someone checked stored plants, rearranging them so air could pass more freely. Children explored nearby, tracing patterns in the dirt, collecting small objects, then losing interest and moving on. Their attention flowed easily, unforced. As the sun rose, warmth spread gently. Shadows shortened. People adjusted without thinking, shifting places, turning faces toward or away from the light as needed. Midday arrived unnoticed. Hunger returned briefly and was answered. Thirst followed and was answered. Rest came naturally, bodies lowering themselves to the ground without hesitation. Someone watched clouds drift overhead, their shapes changing slowly, endlessly. No meaning was assigned. The movement itself was enough. In the afternoon, a quiet focus settled over the group. Tasks were finished, tools checked. Small repairs made, nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. Toward evening, familiar preparations began. Fuel gathered, fire built. Food prepared. The rhythm returned, comforting and reliable. As darkness crept in, people gathered close once more. The fire brightened, pushing back the cool air. Faces glowed softly. Bellies warmed. A sound emerged, low and steady, not quite a song, not quite silence. It filled the space gently, then faded. No one spoke. Children fell asleep early, the day weighing lightly on them. Adults followed soon after, easing into rest, bodies finding familiar places. The fire softened again. Night wrapped itself around the shelter. Stars appeared above, distant and patient. Another day passed, leaving no trace but memory carried in muscle and habit. Another night began its quiet watch. This was how life continued, not measured, not recorded. Simply lived one slow breath at a time. And beneath the vast ancient sky, held by land that asked nothing more than attention and respect, they slept again, steady and complete, as the world turned gently on. The stillness of the night lingered, unbroken and calm, like a blanket laid carefully over the land. The fire remained low, its warmth steady and dependable, never asking for attention, never demanding more than it was given. Around it, sleep rested easily on familiar bodies. Somewhere beyond the shelter, a breeze moved through tall grass, bending it slightly before letting it rise again. The sound was soft, almost like breathing. It passed without notice. Sleep shifted gently. A hand relaxed. A leg stretched, then stilled. Breath slowed further, sinking into deeper rest. The night did not hurry them along. Morning came again, patient as always. Light slid across stone and earth, touching the edges of the shelter first, then moving inward. Someone opened their eyes and watched it happen, not surprised, just present. They waited a moment before rising, listening to the quiet of the group, feeling the calm settle in their chest. Then they reached for the fire, stirring embers, feeding it just enough to bring warmth back to the morning. Flame answered softly. Others woke one by one, blinking, stretching, rubbing sleep from their eyes. A child yawned widely, then leaned against a familiar side, content to stay there a little longer. An adult smiled faintly, barely noticeable, and placed an arm around them. Food was eaten slowly, without ceremony. It tasted the same as it always did, and that sameness was comforting. Eating finished, people sat for a while, simply being awake together. The day felt gentle. No sharp wind. No heavy heat, just a steady balance. People responded naturally, choosing tasks that fit the mood. Some wandered nearby, checking the land, gathering small offerings. Others stayed close, working with hands and memory. A tool was shaped carefully, each strike measured, each pause intentional. A hide was turned, checked, smoothed. Cord was tested between fingers, stretched and tightened until it felt right. Children drifted between adults, sometimes copying movements, sometimes inventing their own quiet games. They stacked stones, knocked them over, stacked them again. The repetition pleased them. The sun climbed and hovered, warming skin and stone. Shadows shortened, then slowly began to stretch again. Time passed without being noticed. Midday rest came easily. Bodies lowered themselves to the ground, leaning into shade or warm rock. Eyes closed, breath deepened. The world continued without interruption. Insects hummed softly. Leaves shifted. Somewhere water moved steadily, unchanged by who rested nearby. When energy returned, it did so gently. People rose, resumed tasks where they had left them. Nothing felt urgent. Everything felt enough. As afternoon softened into evening, familiar movements returned. Fuel was gathered, fire prepared, food made ready. The rhythm wrapped around them again. The fire brightened as the air cooled. Light danced across stone, faces glowed warmly. Food was shared, eaten slowly, bringing comfort more than fullness. Darkness arrived quietly, slipping in around the edges of the clearing. Stars appeared one by one, distant and steady. The moon followed later, pale and calm. Children grew heavy with sleep, heads tilting, bodies slackening. They were guided gently to warm places. Adults followed soon after, easing into rest without resistance. The fire softened again, settling into a quiet glow. Night held the shelter gently, unchanged and familiar. Another day passed without being counted. Another night began without announcement. This was the long, slow thread of their lives, woven from ordinary moments. Steady hands, shared warmth, and patient time. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. And beneath the endless sky, surrounded by land that had always known them, they slept once more, breathing in rhythm with the world, carried forward quietly, gently, endlessly.